welcome to another hour of Gate City Chronicle, the weekly magazine show dedicated to the city of Nashua. Our goal is to introduce you to businesses, to artists, clergy, and your neighbors here in the city of Nashua, New Hampshire. I'm Kevin Avard, your host, and joining me today is State Representative George Lambert. Welcome aboard.
Thank you for having me, sir.
I know that there are a number of new freshmen, and I take it you're a freshman this year?
Yes.
And you serve in the House of Representatives for what town?
I represent Hudson, Litchfield, and Pelham.
Pelham, okay. And what committee are you on, George?
Actually, I currently sit on the Redress of Grievances Committee.
Okay.
It's a unique opportunity in the State House for, unlike other committees which go out and hear bills about changing things that exist, this is a place where people who have complaints and concerns can come and express them, where government hasn't actually served them as well as you'd hope. And so they can come out and say, I have this problem, how can it get fixed, so that we can put together fixes in places where they're getting lost in the system.
So some people have problems with the government, and they come to this committee?
Yes.
Yes. Have you had a few cases?
We've had quite a few cases.
Oh my gosh. Parking meters?
No. I wish somebody would come in on parking meters. I really do. But no, we've actually had things that are really scary. We've had problems of investigative issues with police departments and school systems and cover-up of information and things like that. We have
Are there like allegations of all this? Is that what you mean? Like when you say cover-ups, or is that how they come in and they say there's a cover-up, or there's a problem with the police department? People feeling like they're picked on? Is that how that works? Or?
Oh, no. This one was actually way more interesting. There was a student who went to school, and his parents were having some problems with the school system and some teachers, and the father had basically had a reputation in the community for being somewhat aggressive towards the school and about their procedures and policies. His son was taking an exam, and one of the way that the accusation is made in the committee, the student interpreted a comment made by the instructor, the head of students, who was administering an exam. He says, "You better pass this test, or I'll kill you, because we're not going to deal with your father again."
Pretty strong words.
And the student was scared and filed a police complaint.
Okay.
That's not that much of a problem, because you'd actually like to see that get fixed. But right. In that particular community, the head of the school board was also the chief of police, and the police investigation went nowhere.
A little conflict of interest there.
Right. And so the issue comes out is, how do you deal with potential conflicts of interest? We don't know that there actually was. What we do know is there wasn't an outside agency investigating. Oh. And because of that, how do you really know? And this problem is has further revealed that if you have a member of the school administration who is actually an employee of the school system, any disciplinary action against them is stuck in their personnel file, so that the public can't find out what was the outcome. They just say, oh, we're sorry, that information is shielded under RSA 91A, the right to know law, as an exclusion, so we can never tell you the outcome. And you realize that while the right to know law is fairly open, there are some exclusions in there that keep the people from knowing whether or not there's risk happening. And we can't get the information out. So one of the outcomes of that particular investigation is that we'll go and change the procedure so that if there's a criminal complaint against someone, we can actually get the information back out of the system rather than having it get stuck in a black hole.
Interesting. So this committee that you're on, the Redress of Grievance, this is about the first time it's been operating for at least 100 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's totally true. We have this provision in our Constitution which says that the people can come out and ask for a redress of grievances from their legislature. But our policy for a very long time has been people could come out and file it, and they would write it down and they would submit the complaint. The question was, what happened to them? And they got properly filed as as we're told, sometimes in a box, and sometimes in a folder, and sometimes in the trash. But at least they had an opportunity to submit them.
If I may ask you then, if somebody has a grievance, say maybe with Health and Human Services or DCYF or the court system, do they go directly to a member that is on the committee?
They could, but that's generally, what they need to do is have a state representative actually hear their concern and file a grievance on their behalf. So citizens themselves aren't actually the presenter of the grievance. A grievance is sponsored by a representative who submits a request for a grievance. They explain it in a single page. They summarize the problem and the desired objective. And then we schedule, we get some more material, and then we schedule a hearing. We do some investigation.
So tell me, what do you think it's like being your first year? This is your first year.
Oh, yeah.
What is it like for you as a state representative in the House?
I'll tell you, it's been so exciting. The thing that changes when you go from a citizen activist, which I've been for years, to becoming a state representative is, and someone told me this, I didn't understand it at the time, when you have a problem, somebody will call you back, and if they don't know, if you're not in the right place, they'll send you to the right place. The bureaucracy is big, and trying to find your way through it is complicated. I was able to help some people. I got a phone call from a friend of mine one day. He's a small business owner in Nashua, and he said, I got this letter in the mail from the Department of Labor. He has 2 employees, fairly small. And he got this letter in the mail. And it said, hi, you're apparently in violation, and we've assessed you a fine of $147,000 because he didn't file the right paperwork.
Never mind the parking meters. That's a pretty big fine.
And, well, he called me. He called me because he thought that I had someone send this to him as a joke. And it was no joke. I mean, he didn't understand something that was unclear. He did make a mistake. As soon as he found out about the mistake, he fixed it. He got into compliance, and he told them he got into compliance, and they said, oh, you were out of compliance, so here's the fine.
Oh.
And that was more money. The fine was more money than he was going to pay those employees. And we helped him get a hearing, understand the process, and he got it resolved. They actually reduced the fine from $147,000 down to a little over $1,000.
If I may interrupt you, I'm distracted by a few of your pins. You have 3 different pins there. Could you discuss the New Hampshire flag one? What is that?
The New Hampshire flag one was a pin that was given out when we were electing the Speaker of the House. And this particular pin represented who I was supporting for Speaker of the House.
Okay.
And after the Speaker of the House election, we were all asked to take it off because we really were, after we elected a speaker, one house. The thing is that I really fallen in love with it because of the New Hampshire primary system, because it really symbolizes New Hampshire being, politics in America. And so I put it back on just last week because we're in the presidential primary season. But that's what that one is for.
And the yellow one with the snake on it, I think many people are familiar with that. So you are a Tea Party supporter?
I would have to say that I am. Actually, I'm a supporter of limited constitutional government. I always have been. There's this really great idea. When I was young, I graduated from Pelham High, in Pelham, New Hampshire. But I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Maine. I spent some time in Manchester when I was younger, and then we moved away and we came back. When I came to New Hampshire as a junior in high school, they made me take a class in New Hampshire Constitution and Government. And I realized, and I was older, I was a junior in high school, this is a freshman class, I realized the New Hampshire Constitution is beautiful. It's this document that goes out and says, not as amendments at the end, but at the very beginning, that people have rights, authority, and power, and the government is there to serve them. And I went, wow. And as I became more of a fan of history and the Constitution, I realized that the United States Constitution, as written, didn't actually have any protection for citizens in the original authoring. And New Hampshire, as a state, submitted amendments to the Constitution. There were 12 of them. And 10 of them passed, and they became known as the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is actually what protects people. You have the First Amendment, which actually allows us to talk about just about anything we want on your show. We have the Second Amendment, which is your right to carry and bear arms. We have the Fourth and Fifth Amendment, which is about prohibition against search and seizure and your right not to have to testify against yourself. These are fundamental principles that came from New Hampshire and now protect all the citizens of the nation. So the Constitution's a beautiful thing.
And New Hampshire had a big part in it.
Oh, yes, they did.
And you have another one there, the circular one.
The circular one is actually a member of the House pin. It's a House security pin, and if you have one of these, because they're limited to one per person, they actually know that you're a member of the House, so you can get into the House chamber.
Now, I understand that there are many different caucuses. Who do you tend to caucus with, or is it the freshman class, or is it how does all that work in the New Hampshire House?
I'm a member of the House Republican caucus, which is that we also have a freshman caucus, which is for people who are newly elected because they have very different questions. I'm also a member of a group which is not actually a caucus per se, but it's an advocacy group called the National Rights Council, which is bipartisan. Caucuses tend to be by-party, and so we have this group, which is a council, which is has both Republicans and Democrats. And the National Rights Council is based on Part First, Article 2 of the New Hampshire Constitution, which says that all men are guaranteed certain rights, natural rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we go out and we look at all of the bills that are coming out from a constitutional basis and say, is this really part of the definition of government? As a Republican, I'd have to say that there's this group called the HRA, the House Republican Alliance. My HRA score says that I'm a pretty good Republican. I vote with them about 89% of the time. One would say, is that enough? And my answer to that is, well, it's slightly better than the House Majority Leader, so I guess we're doing pretty well. But, you know, it's all not as black and white as it looks. Right.
So I've heard it said that for the freshmen, it's like drinking out of a fire hose the first year.
Oh, my God, it so is. There's so much reading. Most people don't understand how big New Hampshire government is. I had somebody explain it to me the other day as if you were to print every page of the Constitution, the laws, and administrative rules in this state, it is 11,000 pages.
Incredible.
Now, I put that in context. I convinced my wife earlier this year to read Atlas Shrugged. It's 1,200 pages. And that was a big challenge. She did it. She told me about it. It was great. I cheated. I listened to the audiobook. But
I kind of like to do it that way myself.
But so it took her a long time, and she loves to read, but it took her a month.
Right.
Okay? Well, so to put that in context, this is almost 10 times that size. Right. She would spend an entire year if she wanted to read all of the rules and laws in New Hampshire. Yeah. It's so intricate.
Interesting. Interesting. So tell me, as a freshman, do they pay you a lot of money?
Yes, they do. We get paid $100 a year. $100. Whether or not we use it or not, that will actually cover you for lunch a couple of times. There's a good joke when you get elected, which is, oh, well, wait for all the free food. Yeah, there isn't that much of it, actually. Right. But no, it's this is something you do for passion, not for money.
Which brings me to my next question. There are a lot of freshmen. They're donating their time. I consider $100 a year. I guess that's part of your constitutional pay. That's what they.
Yes.
Yes. But you still have to make a living.
Oh, totally.
And that's got to be hard on the families. There's a lot of people spending a lot of time in committees. When you give yourself in such a way, and you find yourself on the firing line, you have to make a living. You're making popular and unpopular decisions. Can you talk a little bit about that? Number one, maybe the living first, and then, you know, how do you find reward in all of this?
I guess I'm lucky because of the type of job that I have gives me some time flexibility. But I have to say that I spend over 30 hours a week as a legislator when we're out of session, and more than that when we're in it. There's a lot of reading that goes on. There's a lot of phone calls, a huge amount of email. We have every challenge coming at us, whether they're local or national. I have probably received one email every 20 minutes, 8 hours a day, for the last 2 weeks about whether or not Obama's a valid candidate for president of the United States and should be on the primary ballot. And the House is at recess. But people are going, hi, are you doing your job? Are you, what is the New Hampshire House doing to make sure that he's a valid candidate?
That's quite a weighty matter for one state representative.
Well, actually, all of the state representatives are getting this email. I'm one of the people who's out investigating and doing the research to find out whether or not we followed the right procedure. For me, it's not about whether or not he's the right candidate or whether or not he's followed all the rules. It's based on our rules, did we follow the right procedure to get to the right end?
Right. One of the things I'd like to ask you is, we have a number of presidential candidates out there, and what's your gut feeling? Who do you want to support? Who do you support as a state representative?
I was the first candidate. I was the first state representative in a press release to go out and endorse Ron Paul.
Ron Paul.
Yes. For me, it all comes down to a couple simple things. We have this idea that the government exists because of the power granted to it by our constitutions, both state and federal. And we have one candidate who's gone out and said, if our government exceeds its constitutional mandate, it's not doing the right job. Let's make sure that we limit the power of government to its constitutional mandate. And over the years, I was like, I wanted to be a Republican because I like the fiscal discipline. But then I watched George W. Bush. And he spent a lot of money. I'm going, I don't get it. Well, that's certainly not how I understand the Republican position. He also got rid of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is this provision in the Constitution that guarantees that I have the right to a fair and speedy trial. If there's a question about whether or not I'm being held improperly, I can go and ask a judge. I can produce a writ of habeas corpus and say, please explain to me why I'm being held. And, well, we suspended that under presidential power. So there's all this stuff about, government, and are we heading in the right direction?
If I may interrupt you, I just heard that the Senate passed a bill regarding that, something to that effect. Have you heard about that?
I posted on Facebook about it. It's astonishing. A writ of habeas corpus guarantees that you can be told why you're being held and detained, and that a judge will answer that question. And except for in time of war against a specific enemy, we are not supposed to suspend the privilege of habeas corpus. We only would have this so that we could actually hold people who were military combatants, theoretically. The problem is that the definitions have become so loose that somebody could like something I didn't say here today. They could arrest me outside, throw me in jail, and I would never know why or have a challenge as to whether or not that was constitutionally viable, because we have suspended the provision that guarantees that.
What was that bill that was just passed then? Or is it being passed?
Actually, I believe it's passed by the Senate. I don't think it's been passed by the House yet.
Do you know the name of the bill?
I don't. I actually have it on my Facebook, but I don't remember the exact name of it right now.
Okay.
But it was basically re-empowering a previous presidential order that went out and said that we can hold and detain military combatants.
Interesting.
Except for we can do it on our own soil, which is very different.
Which means the military can take somebody, an American citizen, and detain them?
Oh, yes, they can. And,
That's interesting.
if we go back 20 years, and I told you that we were going to have the idea of sneak and peek warrants, where they could actually show up, come into your house without a warrant, go take a look around, figure out what it is they wanted a warrant for, and then go get it, you would be offended if you'd ever actually read the Constitution and the protections that we're supposed to have, both here in New Hampshire and nationally. And you go, well, wait a second, how is our government empowered to do that? Under executive power, we've actually gone and granted these provisions. We've actually gotten to a point where...
Without ratification of the Senate or the Congress, it's just through executive order? Is that
Yes, the president signs a piece of paper.
Interesting.
There's this idea that the president has special powers and can go out and say, in times of emergency, we're going to go and do X, and then have those rules vetted by the Senate and the House, And if there's a challenge, the Senate and the House can make a challenge. They send it to the Supreme Court, and if those two bodies agree, then whatever the president did is invalid. But it doesn't quite work that way, because we've gotten into this bureaucratic system where the Supreme Court won't necessarily even hear a challenge.
Interesting. Tell me another reason why you support Ron Paul.
Sound money. I tell people all the time that your money is devaluing every year. And you've heard me say this before. I walked up and I handed you a silver certificate one day and a silver dollar. And I said in 1964, these were worth the same. If you actually took a silver certificate to the store today, they would treat it like a dollar bill and you'd be able to buy a candy bar with it. Actually, you might need a little change to go with it. They're a little over $1 now. If you were to take that same piece of silver, convert it to its actual silver value, or the value that it had in 1964, its buying power would be around $35 today. With that, you could buy a case of candy bars. And so what's happened is that our paper money has been devalued over time. Now, this is not just an American problem.
Right.
This has happened in every major society that prints money, because over time, you end up printing more of it, and you don't have anything to back it up. But anybody who leaves their money sitting in paper or sitting in a bank account is seeing it lose a little bit of value. It loses about 4% a year.
As they pay taxes on it on top of that.
And they pay taxes on top. It's so true.
Interesting.
And so, Ron Paul has been out there saying now for the better part of 20 years that, we need to have sound money. We need to have accountability in government and, know what's going on at the Fed. Let's audit the Fed. What's really scary is that we talk about, what the national debt is. They say, what, $15 trillion?
$15 trillion. That is equivalent to about $34,000 per American citizen.
Yeah.
And $133,000 worth of tax liability to each taxpayer.
That sounds like a lot of money. Now you want to get really scared?
Yeah.
The Federal Reserve, while nobody was watching, loaned more than that and has backed it by commitments from the American public, which means that the problem is twice as big as that, and every taxpayer owes $250,000 in liability, and we can't even see where it's coming from. We need an opportunity to audit the Fed and to understand about what's happening on our behalf with the money. We went out as federal government programs that have made commitments to banks, we've made commitments to mortgage companies, we've made commitments all over the world to make sure that we have a sound economy. Well, the problem with a sound economy is that if you are taxing people to get the money, and you need an ever-expanding block of money to actually pay the interest, the ballooning of the whole thing becomes rapid and incredible. The real challenge is that when you end up looking at what happened in the Soviet Union, they would print money, and then every few years, they would go out and say, oh, red rubles aren't any good anymore. You can convert them to blue rubles, and blue rubles you can only convert up to 4,000 rubles. So anything you had that was over that, you had to give to someone else. And hopefully they could exchange it. And this system of just printing more money has never actually worked.
Interesting. Give me another reason.
One more reason. Actually, a lot of people have said that when it comes to foreign policy, the United States has been out and become the policeman of the world. The problem is that the policeman of the world role that we've taken on is actually being fed by the labor of the American populace. If you travel outside of the country, you're going to hear people asking questions about why is it that the United States government does this, that, and whatever. And these are things that are being done contrary to what I would suspect is well understood at the water cooler. People aren't talking about issues like what happened in Guantanamo Bay, where we've actually gone out, we've raided other countries, we've walked into Germany, our friends, and taken people out because we didn't like them, and then explained it afterwards. If you listen to the story about the fact that we walked into Pakistan and took Osama bin Laden without the consent or awareness of anyone in their country, that is an invasion by any definition. And our foreign policy has gotten us into a point where the role of policeman says we're going to walk in and start doing things. We're not protecting our own interests. We're not protecting our own innovation and technology. We should be securing our borders, establishing good relationships, domestic relationships, where we allow other people to have the rights and privileges that they want. We should only get involved if it actually impacts our direct interest and focus on us as a nation doing what we are constitutionally mandated to do. We're supposed to protect our borders. We're supposed to make sure that free trade or restricted trade happens. And that's the role of the federal government. It's not to decide whether or not somebody is misbehaving in Europe or in Asia.
Interesting. Have you met Ron Paul?
Oh, yes. I had dinner with Ron Paul on April 15th. It was Income Tax Day. I really wanted to go out and see Atlas Shrugged on opening night. But instead, I had dinner with Ron Paul, and I have to say, it was so great to sit there and talk to a guy and realize that this isn't a line for him. This is not campaign speak. This is the way that he thinks about the world. He comes up to campaign in New Hampshire, and if there's an important vote, he gets back on an airplane and goes back to vote because that's the most important thing that he does.
It's his job. I've actually heard his son speak.
Oh, he's great, isn't he?
I thought he would be a good candidate himself to run. I'm surprised he didn't.
I have said that a ticket of Paul and Paul would be unstoppable.
Yeah.
His son hasn't had enough federal government experience, I don't think, yet to be the candidate.
Right.
But I think after a term as senator, he might actually be a pretty strong contender. He understands both domestic and foreign policy and that kind of stuff. I mean, imagine growing up in a household where dinner conversation really is about what it takes to have a strong constitutional government.
Interesting. Tell me about some of the successes this year.
Well, I'd have to say that success, it always starts with failure.
Okay.
Because we need to learn things. My favorite thing about this year is that on January 4th, a bill that I worked on is coming up for a committee, coming up before the House, ought to pass 16-0, which removes broad-based rulemaking authority from every department in the state, with the exception of one. We go out and say, remember I talked to you about 11,000 pages of rules?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it used to be that a certain number of departments could go out and create their own rules. They could decide they wanted to go and tax milk another 35 cents because they could, without ever asking anyone. They could create new taxes. The direct result of that was an LLC tax that a bunch of small business owners got stuck with. And we wanted to go out and roll those back. So I worked on a bill earlier this year. I brought it in. It was a great idea. It came in as 3 lines. Ended up turning into 6 pages, which went out and said, we're going to remove broad-based rulemaking authority. And it started failing. The committee said, you know what, we haven't asked the departments, it's too much work, etc. And they retained it, and it went to the floor. I thought it was going to fail. The chairman said, let's go pull it back, let's do the work, let's see what it takes. They asked all the committees, what do you need? And then they changed the bill to make it what they need, so that our departments will be more accountable. I find that great. On the Republican side, we've reduced the budget by almost $1 billion. And we did it by going out and finding better ways to spend money. We've reduced our employment. If we have jobs that are posted but not filled, we've taken them out of the budget. In New Hampshire, we do this thing called gross appropriation. What that means is that we take whatever it is we're going to spend, whatever we think we're going to spend, and we collect taxes on it. And then we hope to get revenues for it based on our revenue rules, and we try to make them match. And when the Democrats were in charge a couple years ago, they said, this is what we need to spend. This is our income. Go and project your revenues. Look to the sky. Find the money, but this is the money we need to spend. Now, if we did that at my house, okay, at the end of the year, my checkbook would be empty because we would go spend whatever we wanted to, but we wouldn't necessarily offset it with revenue. The New Hampshire House went out and said, what is it that we know we can get for revenue? What is it we can do? And what programs can we afford to spend on, and where do we need to cut back? The more you look at that, and there are sound bites about how good and how bad it is and horrible programs that are getting cut. But our departments go out and say, I want $42 million. Here's an example. And the House goes out and says, well, we're not going to fund this program. Well, if that program is really important to that department, they can go shift some money. We're just saying we all have to tighten our belts. Our taxpayers have to tighten their belt because they have to pay the bill. So let's go out and find a way to say, we're going to reduce it. Do what you can. And, give them the ability to have affordable taxation and great programs. It just caused our department heads to start shifting and prioritizing in the same way that you have to do at your house. Under
rulemaking, does that also incorporate the judicial part, as far as the judges making their own rules or not having rules. Could you talk a little bit about that? I believe there's a Representative Mirsky is coming up with a bill to amend 73A. And having to do with the court system. Is this the same thing, or is this a little different?
No, it's actually different. The courts actually have their own ability to make and interpret rules based on precedent, and a precedent can end up setting problematic scenarios where you don't necessarily end up with the outcome that the legislature intended. The court system, I don't know if you know, that the New Hampshire court system used to be a part of the general court, the legislature. They weren't a separate branch of government until a constitutional convention a number of years ago. So they used to actually be part and accountable to the legislature. They're not anymore. Since they've gotten that power, they go out and they make rules and then push those rules back. The reason that actually matters to citizens in New Hampshire and taxpayers is the courts now decide how we're going to run schools. It's a really important issue as to how we fund schools. The Supreme Court decided that cherish in our Constitution meant fund, and so we were going to fund the cost of education. We were going to fund it equally across the state, and we lost local control over education based on a court ruling.
I see.
Does that make sense?
It does. Well, and I guess that one of the questions I guess even maybe come before the grievance committee as well are examples when the court says, well, the legislator says one thing, but we're not necessarily accountable because the rules that they've made say that there are no rules based upon our decisions. Is that correct? And
it's totally correct.
And it doesn't make sense to me, but in other words, the judicial branch is not accountable to anybody.
That is correct. The judicial branch is not accountable to anyone other than the legislature and the governor changing their rules.
Now, if I may, just to be, if that is in the Constitution under Article 73A, you would actually need a constitutional amendment to change that.
Partially. We also have the ability within the legislature to define the rules under which the court operates. And so we can go in and say the court must behave a certain way. Let me give you a couple of examples if you don't mind. Right now, if you are charged with a crime and you go in and the Constitution says that you have the right to every reasonable defense. Okay? Right now, if you bring an affidavit from, if I were to go into court and I were to bring an affidavit in from you, signed and sworn document that says there's this evidence, the judge doesn't have to honor it if you're not there based on their rules. So even though you swore this document out, and this happened to me in a courtroom in Nashua this summer. I was there. There were 2 affidavits signed. Okay? The judge threw one out because the person who signed it wasn't in the room. They kept mine in because I was sitting in the room. Because I was there, they had to admit it. The gentleman who wasn't there didn't have his affidavit admitted. Nobody ever asked me a question. But because of their rules, they can throw away evidence. They don't have to hear everything. And a judge's decision is only reviewable by a higher court judge. The legislature can't get involved in specific cases. The governor has the ability to pardon someone based on a decision, but he can't get involved in the actual decision-making process.
Does this bleed into families as well?
Oh, you know what scares me about the family court system? Under our law, there's this idea that you can hear every charge made against you, you can read them, you can understand them, and you can respond to them. In the family court system, we have sealed envelope evidence coming in that only a judge can read. The people who are being accused can't even know what's in those sealed envelopes.
Is that constitutional?
No. Well, I asked that question of the attorney for the New Hampshire Supreme Court. I said, how is that legal? I said, you have a right to every defense. And he said, well, it would be nice if our government was as simple as they told you when you were in the 4th grade. I tell you, I laughed too. My response to him was, what is it this legislature needs to do to get back to that? But the real question was, how is it this can happen? And he said, well, criminally, you have the right to every defense. Civilly, you don't have the same right.
So even if the civil outcome could put you in jail, you don't have to hear all the evidence presented, and you don't have the ability to challenge it all.
So it's not blind justice. It's not necessarily justice.
It is justice within a system of rules that allow you to have jeopardy, and a better lawyer will win over fairness.
I see.
Do you remember the O.J. Simpson trial?
Yes.
There's one soundbite. If you're old enough to remember the O.J. Simpson trial, you remember this one slogan.
I'm old enough, I think. Yeah.
You think?
Yeah.
You know what they said? They said, it was all about the gloves. If the gloves don't fit, we must acquit. Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay? The question was, is that enough? The system comes down to not all of the facts. It comes down to whether or not someone makes a compelling case and argument under the rule. Can we include evidence? Can we exclude evidence? Can we hold the people accountable? If the people who run the government are not accountable to the people that they are governing, we all lose. That's why I love being in the legislature, because I'm trying to make it so that the people who are making the rules are accountable to the people who are being ruled. It's the fundamental principle upon which we founded our government. It is the reason that people signed the Declaration of Independence. It is the reason that the people who signed it knew they were going to die if necessary, and they pledged to each other their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor to protect something that was more important than the establishment.
Very good, very good. Well, I can see our time has run out for this session, and I could sit here and ask you for another couple of hours, just a number of things, and I really appreciate you, Representative Lambert, for coming in. Is there any parting thing that you'd like to leave us? How can people get in touch with you if they need to get in touch with you?
Actually, getting in touch with me is really easy. My email address is marchon, M-A-R-C-H-O-N, like an activist, @gmail.com. And if you want to catch what's going on, you can follow me on Facebook, or you can go to georgelambert.org.
Representative, thank you very much. I
Thank
appreciate
you for
it.
having me.
All righty.
Bye-bye.
And we'll be right back. And we're back with Representative George Lambert. And welcome back, Representative.
Thank you.
Just wanted to talk to you about a couple of issues that are coming before, I guess, the State House or legislation. I guess this whole thing with the gambling.
Oh, man, that's going to be a complicated discussion. This is the first time that the House Finance Committee has gone out and said, let's go and consider expanded gambling in the state. The bill that's come out would have license two casino operations in the state. And there's a lot of debate about it. You know, who's going to be first? New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts. A lot of people say we don't want to bring gambling to the state, et cetera. New Hampshire, interestingly enough, is already a gambling state. We have a charitable gaming statute that allows a nonprofit to have 10 Monte Carlo nights a year with strict limits, regulated.
Excuse me.
And so we already have casinos that exist at a very small level around the state, and there are a lot of them. But what we don't have is a large casino operation. I will be voting against the current proposal from the Finance Committee for two casinos because I believe that the way the bill is currently written, we end up with a challenge, which is whether or not the state can mandate two monopolies, basically end up licensing only two. We have this policy in our Constitution, back to that stupid document again, goes out and says that the state can't pick winners and losers, it can't define monopolies. If we want to say these are the requirements for having casinos in the state, then you do that and you let anyone who can meet the licensing requirement have one.
Right.
But if you say just two, that's a problem because it doesn't actually meet our core principal foundation law.
Right. So again, it is the issue of it being a monopoly, or the state authorizing a monopoly with two different casinos.
Yeah.
Is there room enough for 10 casinos or 20 casinos or How does that work?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about that and discussing it with people. You know, and different casino operations could be different sizes. If we actually had a licensing requirement that we actually charged by the number of slot machines, we charged by the number of table games, we charged basically based on size, licensed it that way, we end up with a very different environment than what they're proposing right now.
Right.
But if it's unconstitutional on its face, no matter how much I like it, I couldn't vote for it. Ron Paul has this slogan that makes me smile every time I hear it, which is, you know, everybody wants a pony. But in the Constitution, there's no provision for a pony. So on the public dime, you're not getting a pony.
Okay.
Well, every bill that comes up before the House,
Right.
I have to use the same yardstick and saying, is this within the limit power of government, and is it the right thing? Not just for the people and the constituents, but within the framework that we've defined as what our role is. And if it's not, no matter how much I'd like it, I can't do it. I'm a big fan of poker. You know, we talked earlier on about the fact that I enjoy going out to a good poker game. I went to poker school in Las Vegas, and I enjoy the challenge of it. But I can't practice here in the state because our rules don't allow me to actually play competitive poker the way that they play it in Atlantic City, Connecticut, or Las Vegas as a sport. I mean, I think it actually is as an endurance, mental challenge sport. But I can't play
A sport. That's funny. I've never heard of poker being considered a sport.
Really?
Yeah, that's.
Oh, wow.
I know endurance is involved because you have to.
It's a concentration game.
Is it?
Oh, it's all about strategy, concentration. Do you know that in California, poker is not considered a game of chance? It's considered a game of skill, just like bridge. Do you know people who
It's a
play
numbers
bridge?
game. You have to count the cards and
Yeah.
the odds and yeah, it's interesting.
And unlike blackjack, poker is not played against the house. It's played against other players. It's very different. It's a challenge competition, and it changes. Even though the way the cards move around the table is the same. If you're playing for different amounts of money, there's a different risk profile. Do you know that you can't have a home poker game at your house and play for nickels and dimes? It's against the law in the state.
I did not know that.
A lot of people do it. I hear people talking about it all the time. I actually ended up having a conversation with a guy who was a member of law enforcement, and I said, hey, you want to come over to my house for a poker game? And he said, do you realize you're breaking the law if you're playing for money? And I said, of course we're not playing for money. Are you kidding me? And I went, oh, there's a bill. And I've put it in this year. It actually goes out and says that a home poker game doesn't fall into the gaming statute.
Interesting. How about this haircutting law?
Oh, my God.
Talk to me. I mean, from what I understand, if somebody is licensed in the state to cut hair, but they go home and they cut it not in where they're licensed, they're actually breaking the law.
Could be, yes.
Okay.
Actually, it's worse than that.
Okay.
I could give you a pair of scissors right now, and you could cut my hair, and that would be fine even if you don't have a license, okay? But if I give you $1, you've then broken the law. The licensing prohibits the payment for certain behaviors, not those behaviors. You could have anybody you want to go out and color your hair, cut your hair, do whatever you want, but as soon as they accept payment, that's a problem. And so...
Okay.
And do you realize that it takes more schooling to get a license to cut hair in this state than it does to fly an airplane?
I've heard that. I think it was Representative Speck Bowers who said that he needed, I think, about 800 hours to fly a plane. But it was 1,500 to become a skilled beautician?
I can't tell you the exact number that it takes to become a licensed hairdresser, but it's a lot. And the problem actually extends worse, in my opinion, into the massage therapy category. A massage therapist who is going to school to learn a trade has to do a certain number of hours they have to practice. They have to give all of their practice time out for free. They can't charge for it at all until they get a license. So we have all these people who are saying, well, you have to protect our industry and our business because we want to make sure people are licensed. But the only way to get a license is to go and do this for free. But if you try to give one of those people money, they're breaking the law. We should have a definition and a distinction between I'm licensed or I'm not. We should make it a crime if you say I'm a licensed this or that, and you're not. But if you have somebody who has a massage therapy license and they don't go back and refile their paperwork at the end of the year, do they lose their skills?
Absolutely not.
Well, except for they can't practice in the state.
Okay.
Right? And so there's this whole, question about whether or not, you lose an ability just because you've actually filled out a form for a piece of paper.
So are there going to be some changes here?
We're hoping so. There's some proposed language coming out in the next session that will actually give us better licensing. There's a bill that's being proposed for next session, as well as the one that's currently out there. There's one that's being proposed for next session that goes out and says that you have to represent if you have a license or not and what licenses you have.
Interesting. Northern Pass.
Northern Pass.
I've heard a lot of things about the Northern Pass. You see signs that say, vote for it, vote against it. What is the Northern Pass? Why should we or why shouldn't we have it?
It depends on whether or not you live in the north or you live in the south. If you want, additional power coming from Canada, then you are in favor of it. If you don't want to look at it and see the environmental impact, then you want to vote against it. Mm-hmm. This is not an easy question.
I didn't mean to give you a hard one, but
it's always a trap. I mean, the fact is that we respond politically to a lot of signs. Mm-hmm. I'm for this, I'm against that. The meat and potatoes is always in the subtlety of the bill. It's not in the soundbite.
Interesting. Well, I wanted to know a little bit about that because I've heard some arguments regarding property rights versus eminent domain versus infrastructure. Right now we're starving for work, energy, infrastructure. When the power went out not too long ago, people were scrambling, and it got us to thinking, how is our infrastructure as far as our electrical grid? Is that going to help us, hurt us? That's the only reason I brought up that question. Is it essential for New Hampshire to have the Northern Pass, or is it just a good business move?
I think it's essential for New Hampshire to evaluate its options and its needs for long-term growth. In terms of the Northern Pass, I actually haven't made a decision because it's a complex argument. Mm-hmm. Certainly, there are other infrastructure challenges that I have actually taken a lot of care at looking at. And the one that is as demanding is communications infrastructure around the state. Do you realize that if you move outside of certain areas, you can't get high-speed internet access? If you wish to go out and buy high-speed internet access for a business in some place like Berlin, New Hampshire, or Lancaster, you can't go and locate a business there because you can't get the infrastructure. There are people who'd love to deliver it, but we have to go and run fiber optic cable up to those areas.
Which is extremely expensive.
Do you know what makes it most expensive? I bet it would surprise you.
No.
Policy. We have this problem. I'm not kidding.
Okay.
Who owns the poles?
The poll tax. Okay. I believe telephone company.
Depends on the community. It's either the telephone company or the electric company.
Okay.
And so you end up with this interesting problem, which is if you're the telephone company and you let other competitors have access to your pole so they can run high-speed fiber optic cable, it puts you at a competitive disadvantage. So what happens is for you to go and put fiber on the poles, you can do that if you're what's called a CLEC, a competitive local exchange carrier. But for you to do that, you have to go and get them to move all of the wires on the poles. Now, there's this argument that says these poles shouldn't be taxed because they're a right-of-way public access infrastructure. And so because they have telephone services on them, they should get a tax exemption. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the people who own those poles are going out and saying, oh, well, we don't really want to let anyone who wants to put stuff on it have fair access. So you end up with a situation that happened earlier this year. You have a school that wants to bring fiber optic cable to from the center of town to the school system. The local taxpayers in that community had to spend $500,000 of their own money to get the cables moved on the poles so that they could have that infrastructure so they had the resources for their school.
Oh, and the taxpayers obviously paid for that.
They did, and it's called make-ready work. Now, there's some provisions that other states have taken, which makes it so that you could reduce the cost and streamline the entire process. However, in New Hampshire, the Public Utilities Commission has, up to this point, sided with people who own the poles, saying we get to make the final decision because we own the poles. Now, it's really funny. Do you know how they get to buy those poles?
No, I don't.
Do you know that if you were to go out and build in a place in Litchfield and you were to go out and say, I want to bring electricity and telephone off to my property, which is 3/4 of a mile off the main drag, I, as the property owner, to get those services, have to buy and pay for those poles. Oh. And then I have to give them to the company that is responsible for the poles in the town. So they get the right-of-way, they get the land access usage, they get all of these things, except for they didn't pay for them, but they become their assets.
Pretty interesting. That's a good gimmick.
Isn't that nice?
That is a good gimmick.
How about if I told you that's been going on since they started hanging electrical poles in this state? Yeah, see, we went out and said, well, we only want certain people to be able to do it. We regulate that. We use the Public Utilities Commission to go out and regulate. We set up rules. We set up procedures. And then anybody who wants to can go and apply. And if there's a dispute, they can take their dispute to the Public Utilities Commission. All hardworking, well-intentioned individuals who go out and say, we need to do what's in the public's best interest. The reality is that you also need the telephone and electrical companies to make enough profit so that they can be in business.
Right.
Now, I'm in full favor of that. I think they need to make enough money to be in business. But under the Communications Decency Act of 1986, the CDA, we went out and said, so that we could have expanded communications infrastructure, there were some rules, and we allowed these new things called CLECs, competitive local exchange carriers. So anyone who wants to go out and sell phone service to your house can sell it because they get registered with the Public Utilities Commission. Okay? They are supposed to be able to buy services at a discount rate from the incumbent local exchange carrier so they can sell you an alternate dial tone service in your house using the existing public poles, wires, etc. All seems pretty cool, right? Well, except for if those guys really want to compete to deliver new services like cable or video or any of the other things, it doesn't necessarily work that way. And so we ended up in Litchfield where, have you heard of Fios, that really cool fiber optic service from Verizon to your house? Mm-hmm. You know, some communities have that. It's available in Nashua, it's available in Salem. They ran wire in Litchfield, but they didn't turn it on. And Verizon moved out. It will never get turned on under the current rules in New Hampshire because they didn't want to have to negotiate based on cable franchise agreements and other things. And it all becomes incredibly complicated because we have these procedures, rules. And you have the same problem with your water supply, by the way. If you want Nashua water, you've heard of Pennachuck.
Yes.
Yes. Did you know that there's Pennachuck and there's Pennachuck East and there's a bunch of other little water companies?
I didn't know that. Yeah. When I was a kid, my friend Norman and I used to hop the fence and go fishing in that place.
Yeah?
We weren't allowed to, but we did.
Well, do you think the fish actually like the worms? I bet they did.
Probably.
Yeah, and we've probably been drinking the water the same way. And you know what? Those fish are going to eat whether you're actually hanging the hook in there or not.
Interesting.
But, you know, Pennachuck, as an organization, is getting bought out. And the city of Nashua is going to take out some long-term debt so that they can purchase the Pennachuck water system. And then the local taxpayers are going to pay the interest on that note for the next 20 years. The really good news about that is you're going to save money over the long term because 20 years from now, it'll be the city who owns it, and so the profit motive will be lower than a private company in Europe that is going and taking your money. But you have eminent domain issues. You have who owns the water rights, who owns the pipelines underneath. How can you expand it? And we have rules that say I can't expand the water system unless the people who who are paying for it are getting benefit. So you end up with the problem that if you have a new community that's being developed, a new build-out, the local water system the local water company can't invest in that. They have to go and get the people who want the property to pay for it and then give them that asset because of these rules.
Interesting, interesting.
But don't worry, there's 10,980 other pages of rules that you could go read if you're bored.
Well, it seems like you have a pretty good handle on things right now as just having this discussion with you. Representative, again, there's the music, so we're going to have to close out our time, but I really appreciate you coming on the show. Again, it's Representative George Lambert from
Litchfield, Hudson, and Pelham.
And thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Thank you, and we'll see you next week on another episode of Gate City Chronicle. Remember, it's your city. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.